Hi, everyone. Welcome to the PreSales Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Cochran, General Manager of the PreSales Collective. And with me is my fantastic co-host, Matthew James.
Hey, everyone. This is Matthew James, New York's pre-sales engineer. Come say hey. We're so excited to have Ron Whitson with us on today's podcast.
We just got done talking to Ron on our PreSales Live show, which, reminder, you can join the PreSales Live show every other Tuesday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. GMT to capture most of the time zones. It'd be very late night for anyone who's in Australia or Singapore, but alas, that is time zones for you. We do have a little bit of a correction we have to make. We gave a wrong name out.
We sure did. We got excited. You can't have Ron Whitson on a podcast and not talk about tennis. So we talked about Djokovic and the incredible Carlos Alcaraz. And I think we got his last name wrong on the podcast, but we are fans of Carlos.
He's a fan of the show, so we want to make sure we shout out
Mr. Alcaraz.
Yes, but we had a great conversation about what it means to be a human leader. Human qualities of pre-sales leadership was the topic we went through today. So definitely want to talk through that. We've got some also amazing guests lined up for you in the coming weeks. So make sure if you are not subscribed to the show, make sure you subscribe wherever you can get it. You can get it on the audio version actually is available on YouTube now as well, Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening to this right now. Or like I said, follow our page on LinkedIn to get the show notifications for the PreSales Live. Matthew, any other thoughts before we hop into the show?
Time to get into this right after the break.
SoulCon is the first ever conference just for pre-sales leaders. We are bringing together top minds in the pre-sales space for full days of intensive learning and networking across two coasts. Join us in the San Francisco area on May 15th, 2025, or in New York on September 4th, 2025, or come to both. At SoulCon 2025, you'll tackle the challenges of pre-sales leadership head-on through hands-on workshops, expert panels, and strategic keynotes. You'll leave with frameworks for measuring your teams, strategies for gaining influence within the boardroom, and models for building and enabling your teams. What I like most about SoulCon is that it's going to be tactical. This isn't going to be full of sessions just to make you think, though I'm sure you'll have an epiphany or two. It's designed to give you things you can take back to your teams and implement immediately. Early bird pricing is available now for both conferences. And if you register in January, you'll be entered in a raffle to win a free professional photo shoot the morning before the event. That's more than worth the price of admission right there. I'm very excited about SoulCon and hope to see you there. Head over to presalescollective.com/SoulCon-2025. That's SOLCON-2025 for more information and to secure your ticket. We'll see you there. I love this topic because I have been talking to a lot of people over the past 6 months or so. I've been really talking to a lot of people who've been in pre-sales management and pre-sales leadership roles, and a topic keeps coming up. There's a lot of people who hop into that in one way or the other. Often they're the best individual contributor and they get promoted in to pre-sales leader. And it's not always the best role for someone, so to speak, or people feel really ill prepared for what the role has to offer, what they're going to need to do in the role. So I wanted to get into this topic to talk a little bit about the types of things that someone needs to understand, what they need to know to really excel as a new pre-sales leader and explore it from kind of a human qualities perspective. But before we do that, the first thing that we always got to ask everybody is, what are you listening to? I guess we'll start with you, MJ. I'll give Ron a little bit of time to think about it. MJ, what have you been listening to over the past week or so?
I picked up a new podcast, and it's called She Means Biz. She Means Business. And this is a podcast which speaks to my heart because it is across New York and London, our two incredible women co-hosts talking through their experiences in the professional world. And the most recent episode was, how do you set goals for 2025 that you can actually stick to? And accountability is one of the big things that I'm taking away from this recent episode. She Means Biz. Check it out.
I will definitely check that one out. Not like I need more podcasts to add, but I'll check it out. Oh, Ron, next, I'd love to hear what you've been listening to.
I'm so boring. It's all 80s all the time for me, guys. I've got a nice Sonos speaker in the office, and I tell the little assistant there to play my 80s music, and it's a lot of Howard Jones. And I mean, that's what I like. So no apologies.
Ron, You got to tell me a little bit about Howard Jones. You can blame it on whatever you like. Say that I'm in London right now. I've never heard of Howard Jones. Who's Howard Jones?
So Howard Jones, and he's still making music today, incredible synth pop pioneer from the 80s. His probably best well-known hit is a song called Things Can Only Get Better. He also had a song called What Is Love, but it's not the Hathaway What Is Love. It's Howard Jones What Is Love. And you have to be careful when you search for Howard Jones because there's actually a like metal rocker Howard Jones, and that is not my guy.
I'm going to be checking out both Howard Joneses, metal and synth pop.
I really enjoy him. He's a Buddhist. He's very positive, and his music always reflects a very positive intent.
Well, things can only get better on this podcast as we get into the topic. But Jack, what have you been listening to?
I have a podcast, not a new podcast for me, but there's an episode I listened to this last week that I really enjoyed. It's a podcast called Talking Too Loud. The company Wistia, it's their CEO's podcast. And they had an episode where they had the chief strategy officer from Adobe come and talk to them. The podcast is very focused on entrepreneurship, and I really enjoy it. It's got a lot of good humor to it. They're very engaging people to listen to. Is kind of the reason why I listen to any podcast. But this specific one I really enjoyed because it talked about sort of the commoditization of creative output. Things like podcasts, short form video, long form video, blog posts, et cetera, that there are a lot of tools that are making it easier, lowering the barrier of entry to create these things, right? It's easier than ever to start a podcast now or host a show, as we're experiencing here. And the point they were making is that commoditization, making it easier, doesn't make the high quality content any less valuable. And he pointed to the things such as clothing was one of the examples he gave, which if you think about it, you can go out and buy a $3 shirt from Walmart or anywhere else. But that doesn't mean that high quality kind of luxury brands don't exist because of it. In fact, what he was saying is that when you get to the point where something becomes a commodity, the luxury becomes even more valuable at that point. People are willing to pay for it when they explored that through the podcast. Very interesting, a take I'd never thought about, but I think it's something that, especially if you are in the creative space at all, something to kind of go, okay. Now, granted, Adobe has a horse in this game towards the commoditization of creativity, but it was an interesting perspective that I enjoy hearing.
Love that. Maybe it's time to get into something that is probably not a commodity yet, and that is great pre-sales leadership. Now, I know we all have in common that at one point we got promoted from a IC that was doing really well into a pre-sales manager or leader. And Ron, you have a special story about that. So how did you first get into pre-sales leadership?
I was that high-performing individual contributor. I mean, that was my first goal as I got into this, was I want to be the person that the sellers wanted to work with and the person that you wanted, working with you on the big deals. And I achieved that. And so I was working for my dear friend, Shane Phillips, who hired me into this crazy profession many years ago. And we got acquired by IBM. Now, we had come from about a 200-person company to be acquired by about an 800-person company, and we're all still working together. And then IBM acquired us, and they were 340,000 people at the time. And a little bit into the job, Shane just kind of got buried under the administrivia stuff that IBM foists on their managers. Now, again, if you trained everything, it's probably a different take, but going from the smaller organization to this giant corporation, it was a lot. And he came to me one day, he says, hey, this is just too much. I'm going to have to leave and go do something else. And I felt kind of bad. It's like, listen, I'm going to miss you, but can I have your job?
Did you ask him that? Did you say right there and then, all right, well, I'm taking your job then?
I absolutely did. I said, can I have your job? And he was very supportive, but I did a full-on campaign to earn the role. I did a full-blown SWOT analysis of the current state of the team, who I knew very well. And then I built out a 30, 60, 90-day plan that I presented to leadership, and they gave me the opportunity. So that was how I first got into leading pre-sales teams. Now, the other thing that kind of happened there that made it a better experience for me was IBM put me through their leadership training program, which was absolutely transformative.
So their IBM leadership training, what was that sort of focused on at the time? Was that about just the things you need to know to do good one-on-ones? What do they take you through there?
So it was really more from a leadership standpoint. It was really, really interesting. And as I was first given this leadership position, because the training didn't happen like right after. There was a little while there where I probably didn't do the best job because the qualities that made me good as an IC were not the qualities that people wanted to see in a leader. I knew I was really good at the job, but I was more than happy to tell you how good I was at the job and what you should do and what you should do to be better at it. And I was very arrogant, and that was not a good quality for a leader to have. So that took some learning. But the approach that they took to this leadership training was before you attended, and it's the first and only time that I showed up at an airport and there's a person with my name on a plaque and you jump in the town car and they whisk you off. At headquarters up in Armonk, there are corporate apartments and classrooms and a cafeteria and a gym, and you are there for the week and you are very focused and they have your full attention. But before you go to that, there are some very in-depth interviews. You're completing a survey, your team is completing a survey, your peers are completing a survey, and your leadership team is completing a survey. And it gets released to you slowly during the week, or at least it was at this point. This has been a few years back. I don't know if they do the same thing, but it really introduced this concept of we all have this perception of how we're presenting ourselves to the world, to leadership, to our peers, to our team. But guess what? That doesn't always align with what those people's, your team, your peers, your leadership, what their perception is of you. And so it starts exposing some of those gaps. And it was really thought-provoking. And wait a minute, I'm this, and I'm presenting this. And the feedback you get is, well, no, you're actually presenting this other thing. And so that was really interesting to me. And it really started having me go down these paths of, well, how do I change someone's perception? The only way you can change someone's perception of you is how you treat them. And so really it gets kind of into this whole soft skills, relationship skills, human aspect of it, of things that you need to get better at to treat someone the way you want them to perceive you. And this is in the book. And a lot of times I think as technical people, when we get that feedback, hey, you got to work on your soft skills, you got to work on your people skills, I think it falls flat. And sure, we can go search soft skills and people skills. We can find all these books and all these resources, but I don't know that there's ever that list of the specific ones we need for our pre-sales role. And I'm very particular about pre-sales. I mean, we're good at what we do. We need some help. And that kind of led me down this path of, okay, these timeless behaviors, these 7 things, right? Here's the book, here's the recipe, here's the step-by-step instructions that can give us some clarity on some very specific skills I think are really helpful for what we do.
That is such a fascinating process to kind of put a mirror up to you. So if you remember, what were some of those gaps? And then how did you think about changing people's perception of you?
Well, let's take a hypothetical, okay? What if the feedback a leader was getting was they were perceived as being very arrogant?
Interesting.
Again, hypothetical, purely hypothetical here.
Completely. Just imagine it in your head. No one in this room, no one who's listening, someone else.
Yeah, someone else. At first, I believe this hypothetical person would be kind of stunned because that's probably not what they were trying to project. So then you go that next step further in the feedback to understand what are the behaviors that the people were perceiving to create that impression that this hypothetical person was being arrogant. And some of those behaviors were the concept of telling rather than coaching, not having vulnerability, always having the answer, knowing that this hypothetical person was correct and there was no discussion, there was no room to have other thoughts, those types of things. And I think that's the very tight line that we ask leaders to walk is to, yes, you're leading, but also you're trying to make the space for your team to learn and grow and not make too many bad mistakes. You want to kind of be the safety net there for them. But the only way people grow is if you give them that opportunity to try other stuff. Anyway, kind of getting back to this, for this hypothetical person, that was very eye-opening to say, okay, that's not what I'm trying to project. How do I change that?
Yeah. That's the type of reflection that I think you're never going to really do unless someone challenges you to do it. Certainly, I think this is kind of the crux of the problem I was looking at the very start. As a high-performing individual contributor, you've likely never thought about that aspect of leading people before you are thrust into position and are told, now take everything you've done as an individual contributor and use that to be a good leader. But I feel like that's where a lot of us face. So does that hurt, or would it be better off if you were a bad individual contributor leading the team? Or maybe if you didn't have pre-sales experience?
Yeah, I don't think so, Jack. And here's the deal, right? As the top individual contributor, think about it, we probably worked towards that. The focus was mainly on ourselves, developing our skills and everything else. And we like getting promoted to leadership because that's more recognition. That's fueling the ego. That's feeding us. That's making us feel validated. And yes, I know what the heck I'm doing. However, as a leader, you have to flip that lens 180 degrees. It is no longer about you. it totally becomes about the team. And that was another one of the lessons learned early on was I can't go around boasting about, well, I did this and I did this. And it's always about the team once you attain that leadership role. That's your job. And the amazing thing for me was the more I focused that attention and credit to the team, the more it actually got reflected to me, and it actually did help my career. But I think that's the big change that we have to make in ourselves as we move from an IC role into a leadership role is you have to flip the lens of focus. It's no longer about you. It is about the people on your team who you're trying to help grow and develop.
You know, it's so funny. I had the chance to go to a leadership training program put on by the PreSales Collective a few years ago. This was when I had just started to manage a team of 2 at the time. And I'd gone from being a high-performing individual contributor to managing this team of 2. James Kakis, one of the founders of the PSC, said to me, you have to ask yourself, do you want this to be about you? Because if you do, you shouldn't pursue this leadership path right now. If you still want all of the credit, then you should continue to be an IC. And I think that's something that stuck with me a lot. I have another question for you, Ron. So how do you shift that mindset? How do you go from having all of the answers? And sometimes as a leader, you do have an answer or the answer. How do you shift that towards coaching a team of individuals?
For me, it was a slow process of learning. And what was nice was as I started to make some of these changes in my behavior, the successes and the results came pretty quickly. So it was nice validation that, okay, if I move in this direction, it's going to work out. So that was really, really helpful. Plus, I had some great mentors around me. Cleo Clark, who I absolutely adore. She's a fantastic leader at IBM, and she was really instrumental in how I approach this role of leadership and some of the behaviors and qualities I want in my life to her. But I think yes, you're going to have the answer, but your job as a leader is not to tell your team the answer. Your job is to help them get to that answer or a very similar adjacent answer through this coaching, through this questioning, through this making space where they feel comfortable throwing ideas back at you. The leader who's telling people to do stuff, actually, that's probably more of a manager who's telling people to do stuff and has the yes people on their team who just go and do it. That's not a great situation for either of them. The leader's not going to grow and the people on the team aren't going to grow. But if I've got a really clear idea of how I think a POC should be run, including one of the most critical things I believe is success metrics, then through questioning and through just kind of coaching with my person on my team, I can talk about what steps they think need to be in place. And hopefully they'll get to that with success metrics. If not, then maybe I could suggest it. Hey, have you thought about what's going to let us know if this customer will be successful or not with this POC? So leading the team where they find the answer to me, that's really the empowerment moment. That's when they grow. That's when you develop your skills as this coach and this mentor, right? Now you've got someone to come around to your way of thinking without just telling them this is the way it should be done.
I think that empowerment moment is really important because I know when I've led teams and talked to people, I'm trying to do what I can to get them to the point where they feel like they have what they need to make the decision without needing my input or my direction, and that they're moving down the right path. I always felt that sense of success when someone would finally take something and do it, and it was fantastic, and it's something that I really didn't have all that much to do with. That's when I feel like you've done well, which is very much the opposite of how we think of as, when we were individual contributors. It was very much the things that are happening are because I'm specifically pushing and directing and driving the strategy and driving what we're doing from a demonstration perspective, driving what we're doing from a business value perspective. Instead, now it's you're hoping that, or not hoping, you are enabling your team so that they can do their jobs, do their roles effectively without your direction is when you've been successful, which is a very almost not backwards, but it's flipped on its head from what we normally would expect.
There's this weird thing, too, about human behavior, because it's kind of like a subtle, small shift. Go from telling to coaching, questioning, and allowing the team to get there on their own. You have the moment of empowerment. And instead of kind of like, let's think about telling. Telling is, here's where we're going. Now just do that thing. Sure, you get that one thing done. And that's kind of like your one product. So like 1 + 1 = 2 in that case. But when you go with a leader who empowers their team, the team takes autonomy and probably creates something a little bit new that's going to be unique to them. So you get a little bit more than a 1. And then afterwards, the leader also gets to give input. So you get a little bit more than a 1. And then the leader takes that forward into the rest of the team. So you get 1 + 1 = more than 2. And it's all because of that way that you shift in thinking, Ron. So thank you for taking the lead and showing us all that we should be doing more of that. I still find myself telling in situations. And I've noticed that the best leaders, and especially executives that I work with, are slow to tell and quick to question.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to express it, MJ. And part of that is just the speed of business too. We all have so many things that we have to get done and so limited time to do them. And sometimes it's really challenging to make the space to have those coaching moments, those teaching moments, as opposed to the telling moments. The other thing I think about is when we take someone, make them a leader, typically it's because we want to replicate their behavior and their performance. And yes, I can do a lot of demos and I can work on a lot of deals, but if I could have a team and develop a team that can do that similar role, then I've just scaled myself, multiple times over. So as a leader, we have to do that. We have to create that repeatable process. We have to create this ability for others on our team to perform the way we were performing if we were a high performer. And again, just making the space for those conversations is critical. But to do that, I think the single most useful tool that a leader has in their arsenal is the one-to-one time. Even with a large team, I think it's super important to make those one-to-ones on a very regular basis. I would say no more than every other week. And the reason for that, here's how I think about that. If we're having a one-to-one at least every other week, then I think that one-to-one is just an ongoing conversation. And we're talking about these teaching moments. We're talking about life in general. I'm getting to learn the people on my team. They're getting to learn me. We're getting to know about each other as human beings. I get to learn about what their aspirations are for their career development, because those are really important things too. And when stuff pops up, it's a minor course correction as opposed to going without talking to someone regular and then you're a quarter in and a couple of things have gone sideways. And all of a sudden, when you talk to them, it's constructive criticism, possibly negative feedback. That's not ideal. That's almost training the people on your team to know that when you're reaching out, it's because you're going to gripe at them about something. So I think if we take that time and we invest in these regular one-to-one conversations, and it's not always about, hey, Jack, what are you working on this week? Hey, MJ, which demos do you have this week? It's like, hey, what's going on, man? Oh, I see you're in London. That's great. You having a good time over there? And we just have these human conversations. We learn about the individuals, and those spaces for those empowerment moments, those teaching moments, whatever you want to call them, I believe they'll kind of just happen more naturally.
You put the speed of business out there as one thing that you're thinking about. And then you're talking about one-to-ones as a place to deepen your relationship and deepen your trust with your team. And I think that those things are critical to put together, because when you're trying to move quickly, sometimes having a deeper relationship is going to allow you to communicate in some ways that you just don't have time for, right? You have a level of trust where you can say, all right, I know that you're really good at this part of the presentation we're putting together. Now let's spend a lot of time on this, and I'm going to go pretty deep on this. So work with me here to get this to the best place that it can be. So the one-to-one, very important. And you said every other week, you think?
I think that's probably the longest period I'd want to go.
Yeah. Regular connections. I mean, even if someone is at the point of not really needing any direct immediate coaching, I think knowing that access is there is very important. You want to make sure that the person who says they have your back as an individual contributor, that person who is saying, I've got you, you have my support, that you don't suddenly become distant because there's not an immediate need.
Well, let's do a little exercise here, guys. Let me ask you guys a question. Has there ever been a time when you thought, I've got too much time talking to my leader? Answer for me typically has been, no, I always want more time. So flip that. If you're a leader of a pre-sales team, flip that around. You may think, oh, they don't want to hear from me. No, the opposite is true. They're hungry to hear from you. And guess what? If you're having this regular conversation and you jump on in 15 minutes, you've caught up and there's nothing else to discuss, give them back some time. I really do think that as a leader, our job is to take the mission from the company and make it consumable to our teams so they understand, but more importantly, not only do they understand the mission, they understand how their daily work contributes to achieving that mission. Sometimes we don't always connect the dot. We assume they're going to connect the dots. I think it's important for us to make that really, really clear. That way, then they understand why what they're doing every day is important and how it contributes. But then once we've got that in place, assuming we've got the right people in place and they've got the right set of skills, then our job as leaders is to remove those roadblocks. And if we're not giving them that regular space, that regular communication, how do we know what roadblocks they're facing? So I think that's a non-negotiable as a leader, is that regular one-to-one communication. If you don't have anything to talk about, fine, it's going to be a really short call. But give them that opportunity to bring things to you. And again, if you're only griping at them once a quarter because they screwed up a demo, they're never going to come to you with their aspirations and, hey, I've got this thing, could you help me out with it? Because you've not demonstrated your ability to help them with that. Going back to something, Jack, I think you said this earlier about maybe it would be good to be a bad IC and be a leader. Again, that's kind of a funny one, right? But the teams that I've been a part of in the past, they felt comfortable coming to me, asking me questions about demo or presenting because they see me doing it and they see me having success at it. So I think my performance as an individual contributor has certainly been a strength of me as a leader, because people on the team feel comfortable that I'm going to have some suggestions for them that will be helpful.
I'm glad you went back on this, because I do have, I think, a follow-up direction that I really want to dig into, which, Ron, you and I have talked a little bit about this in the past, so I'm not putting you too much on the spot. But you like tennis, right? Let's start with tennis. Best tennis player right now, who is it in your opinion?
Oh, gosh. I was just watching the Australian Open early this morning with Carlos Alvarez and Djokovic. Now, Djokovic, fantastic player. He's a bit of a unfriendly human sometimes. I don't like him that much personality-wise. Carlos is amazing. He's going to have so many majors down the road. But anyway, those two are at the top of the game right now, certainly.
You're so right, too, by the way. I'll just toss that in there. Carlos is the kind of person that you would want to bump into at the pub. And sure, I'll bump into Djokovic, too, but I feel like I could chat for hours with Carlos.
Yes, 100%.
So Carlos Alvarez and Djokovic, both at the top of their game. There's no better tennis players, but they both have coaches. Now, are the coaches better than Alvarez or Djokovic? No, otherwise they'd be the top. But they still have coaches, and they're still getting value from their coaches. How does this work from a leader perspective? Because I don't want my team to think they can't get better than me, but how do you flip that where suddenly you can have someone who's better than you and still coach them and lead them and help them get better at their craft? How does that work?
Flip one word in what you just said, not better, different. You guys maybe have been doing this a shorter period of time than I have. We'll just leave it right there. I think there's something to be said for experience, right? And I've got a lot of thoughts about things. But as you get further along in your career, one of the most difficult challenges is understanding your blind spots, understanding your weaknesses, understanding the areas where you need to improve. I've been doing pre-sales 26 years. I'm pretty good at pre-sales, right? It's hard for me sometimes to find areas where I'm lacking a bit. And again, I really do want to continue to grow and get developed. And I love what Chris White has in his book, The 6 Habits of Highly Effective Sales Engineers, about the asymptote, right? There's a line of perfection and we're always approaching it. We'll never touch it, but we can always keep getting better. So that's really, really important to me. I can't do that unless I find others who can look at what I'm doing with fresh eyes and offer different insights. And I really enjoy doing that. And when someone tells me something, I don't have to accept it as gospel and say, oh my God, now I've got to stop showing slides because slides are out. I take that as some advice that goes into the brain with everything else and figure out, okay, here's what they said. How do I interpret that? What can I take from this to help me get better? So that's one thought. And, it can be informal stuff. It can be formal stuff. I see a lot of people out there who have content that I really do enjoy and thoughts I find interesting. So I'll just engage with them and have a conversation, see where that goes. For people on my team in the past, I have actually used the PreSales Collective, the PreSales Leadership Collective, in a really interesting way. I went out and I put up a post, hey, I've got these 2 individuals. I'd love to find some external mentors for them. And I kind of described, where these guys were at in their careers and what they were looking for and what I thought they could use. And I had a number of people step up right away from the PreSales Leadership Collective and volunteer. And I had conversations with them and I kind of whittled it down. And I gave each of the people on my team, say, hey, go talk to these 2 people. Find out which one you feel comfortable with. Who do you think you can learn from? And the feedback I've gotten from the people on my team for that, they said it was amazing. It was really, really useful. It's another set of eyes. It's not someone better than them. It's someone different from them to help them find areas to grow and achieve.
It can be so hard to find other voices. When you're an SE, you've got your regular cast of characters. You've got probably a person in marketing, a person in product, the AEs that you work with very regularly. And so you hear a lot on the things that they're passionate about. And what if there's an area of things, something that someone in another line of business would think of, a different way that they're doing it? Apparently, slides are out. No one's ever told me that. I've never heard that in my entire career, and I need to hear that so that I can think, what's behind that? And Ron, is that really something that someone said to you?
It is. Emily Dulart, who is a great pre-sales leader now, she is not a fan of slides. So she and I have different thoughts on that, but she does a wonderful job.
I have started hearing that as well. The sentiment behind when I really dug into the first person I heard told me that, it was more around everyone has seen the same slides over and over again. So unless you're making a point that's different and going to stick in someone's mind, you're just creating white noise as opposed to presenting your idea. So being more thoughtful about what you present and doing so very sparingly. The slides are out. I think they're still saying, yes, we can still use slides, but being much more thoughtful about how we use them was how it was explained to me when I asked for more detail.
It's like slides with a capital S, the kind of deck we've seen 100 times before. Here's who we are as a company. Here are some of our amazing customers, this kind of thing.
Yeah. Here's our NASCAR slide with all the logos.
Yeah. Here's the analyst slide. We're their darlings. They love us.
Here's a use case that we paid for, and it shows great value.
MJ, go back to something you said, though. I think there's a part of our sales engineering, pre-sales DNA that makes the looking for mentors and coaches sometimes very, very difficult. And it's why timeless behavior number 5 is practice humility. We're typically really smart people. We've had success. Our way has worked. And sometimes I think it's really tough to have that humility and be humble and admit that there's areas where we could do better, and then to actually go express that to another human being and ask for their assistance in growing. I think that's a really important aspect of it. You have to realize that you don't have all the answers. You don't know everything. You know a lot of stuff. We'll give you credit for that, but you don't know it all. So maybe there are some people out there that could be helpful to you.
Ron, what has practice humility looked like in your career?
Eating a lot of crow early on and going back to teams and explaining that, this is a behavior that I'm working on and need to change. Humility, a lot of the times, for me, looks like, and this is a very poor example, I'm a guest on podcasts, but a lot of times humility for me looks like speaking less. I want to learn more from the people, in the room and hear more about those things. And there will be a point where my expertise or my insight is needed, but I'm going to allow this other stuff to happen and for that moment to occur naturally where it comes to me for that, as opposed to going in and here's what we're doing, people, let's go.
Yeah. It's very difficult, especially people who are in pre-sales, to speak less because we're told, hey, we're the person bringing the solution, the ideas, the value, engage with people. People are there because they want to hear from you. But you're right. You need to speak less, even in the customer conversations, in conversations even with those who are trying to help you. Absolutely agree. For those who want to find you, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, probably the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. I'm pretty present there. It's funny, I've been doing sales engineering for a while, so my LinkedIn profile is Ron Whitson SE. But yeah, find me on LinkedIn. It's pretty easy. If you see the guy with the tennis ball next to his name, that's me. So click connect. Love to connect with everyone. There's a website for the book. It's more of just a landing page. There's not a ton out there right now, but timelessbehaviors.com talks a little bit about the book and just, can give you more insight there. Obviously, the book is on Amazon. It's available in paperback, hardback, Kindle, and very, very soon there'll be an audiobook version. We've got some exciting, news on that. I don't know if you want to share that on this show, but an audiobook version is just weeks away at this point.
Excellent. Well, Ron, thanks so much for joining us on the show, and people should connect with you if they haven't yet. So thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the PreSales Podcast. These shows are recorded live during our bi-weekly LinkedIn show called PreSales Live and include a listener Q&A after each recording. To find information on the live show, head to presalescollective.com/podcast, follow the PreSales Collective page on LinkedIn, or join the PreSales Collective Slack. We have a dedicated channel for the PreSales Podcast where you can find more information and join in the conversation after the show. We'll see you next time.